Hi, everyone. My name is Andrew Gaffey, and I am a second year doctoral student in saxophone at the University of Illinois, where I'm also the saxophone teaching assistant. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Associate Professor of Saxophone, Dr. Nicki Roman, and talk a little bit about her concerto, Unquiet Waters, which you'll hear on the next Illinois Wind Symphony concert. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to chatting.
Great. So, Dr. Roman, you have a unique relationship with the school, having been a student here at one point. Could you talk about some of your experiences and your history with the school and what it's like succeeding our mutual teacher, Professor Deborah Richtmeyer, now as a member of the faculty?
Sure. So I moved to Champaign, Illinois in 2013 and did my master's degree in saxophone from 2013 to 2015. It was really my first experience in the Midwest. I grew up in Florida, which I know Andrew has experience living in Florida as well. And so it was quite a lot of change for me, but very quickly I joined the studio and felt like I found a home and a sense of community, both with the studio, with Professor Rickmeyer, and with the program, which I think is what's really special about U of I and studying and being a part of that community. So I had a really beautiful time. When I think back, I was only a student at U of I for 2 pretty short and fast years, but it felt like a really long time. And I felt like I kind of never walked away, even though I went off and did a lot of other things before coming back. I always felt really deeply connected with the program. The saxophone studio at U of I has a really strong legacy of excellence, and that is primarily in part to Professor Rickmeyer and her tenure at the program, and prior to her, Joe Luloff, and they're both really wonderful mentors in my life and still continue to be. So it's a bit overwhelming to think about kind of continuing this legacy that has been built, I think, not only in the saxophone studio, but amongst the School of Music. It's amazing to really just think about all of the former pedagogues and artists that have come through the program as students, as teachers, and now getting to teach alongside faculty that I've really looked up to for years, even before I was a student there. So I'm kind of still navigating what that means to me, and I know for years to come, I'll continue to think about that. It's only been 2 or 3 months since joining the faculty, but it's just really been an honor to work with really great students and faculty.
Yeah, that's really, really great. And this first concert, this being your first semester, is going to feature you really nicely, and everyone will get to hear your really amazing playing. So the piece you're playing, Unquiet Waters by Kevin Day, I know that you have a long history with as well. Could you talk a little bit about how you kind of got to know Kevin and your history with this piece, kind of like where it came from?
Sure. It's a little bit of a weird kind of not linear path to this piece. Kevin wrote the first movement kind of as a standalone work for saxophone and piano in 2020. And because I had won the NASA solo competition a few years prior, I was picked to perform the winning piece for the composition competition that NASA has. So my first experience with Kevin and this piece was the piece kind of just came to me, and I knew very little about the piece, and I had kind of known a little bit about Kevin's music. So I started shutting the piece and gave the premiere of this standalone through composed work for saxophone and piano. And he was at the premiere, and then we just started chatting, and I think in a matter of like weeks he wrote the second and third movement and just sent it to me. And I was so really excited because I loved working on the material he had prior, and we kind of just kept chatting. And then the world shut down and it was the pandemic, and so it was that piece that got me through the pandemic. And I think we a lot of us as artists can think back to kind of what kept us going. And for me, it was Kevin's music, not just Unquiet Waters, but his music and his artistry. He's a fantastic jazz pianist, and you hear that in his music. So then I recorded an album with Casey Dearlam-Che, my pianist, and we named the album Unquiet Waters. So it continued this kind of beautiful journey. And then I remember chatting with Kevin and saying, what would it look like if this was a concerto? And he immediately was like, yes, oh my gosh. And again, like Kevin does, just sent me these scores and the orchestration in a matter of weeks, and was just so excited. And then we premiered it in 2023. in Mississippi, and have continued to just be on this journey with this piece that every time I think I'm putting it away, it always finds its way back to me. And so each time I've played it, it's felt really different and it's been really wonderful. I'm super excited to play it with the Wind Symphony as a former member of the Wind Symphony. And we were talking about legacy, but the legacy of the band program at U of I runs so very deep, all the way back to John Philip Sousa. So even just getting to rehearse the piece in Krannert a few weeks ago and kind of being on that stage as a soloist was pretty full circle for me. The piece is entitled Unquiet Waters because it deals with the idea and philosophy of the waters of our mind. And each movement is based on that. So the first movement kind of brings the listener on a journey of liveliness and energy. The second movement is very different. It's titled Still. So it's in some ways a little more internal. And then the last movement, Disturbed. So it takes the listener and the performer and the performers on so many different journeys. And I feel like this piece has taken me on those journeys too, in maybe an intentional or unintentional way. So.
Yeah, yeah, that's really, really awesome. Could you kind of talk a little bit more like what the audience might expect to hear in the piece? You talked about that a little bit, but maybe some of the saxophone elements of it, or kind of the more of the emotions that he's kind of bringing out of the piece. It's really exciting work. So,
Sure. I think energy in all forms is something that I think a listener will hear. I think it's also helpful to know that as a performer, that's something that it's taking me on that journey, and I'm trying to showcase that to the audience. And I think Kevin does that really well in his music. I think there's a lot of excitement, but I think the listener will also experience sadness and sorrow and whatever that means based on a listener's experience. Um, it's funny. Well, it's interesting to play it with piano and then and perform it with wind band because there are many elements that feel quite different when you perform in front of a full ensemble, right? Um, Less of this feeling more intimate, although there's intimate kind of moments in the piece, it feels a lot more external and kind of going between those characters is really interesting. And I think that's something the audience is going to hear in a variety of different ways. I think Kevin thinks a lot about color and timbre, and you'll hear that in the saxophone line because of his huge background in jazz. You'll hear a lot of emphasis on jazz harmony, jazz syncopation. He loves the altissimo register and the upper register of the saxophone, but he also writes beautifully for the low register, and so it pushes me as a performer um, to think about color and timbre and getting beyond kind of the technical elements of the saxophone, which is something I'm always exploring for and working with composers and new compositions.
hmm. Yeah, that's really great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I hope that you will join us at our Wind Symphony concert on Wednesday, December 4th at 7:30 p.m. in the Great Hall, and also live streaming, I believe, on YouTube. Thank you, Dr. Roman. Really looking forward to an amazing concert and to your kind of concerto debut at the University of Illinois.